On this episode of the Hockey IQ podcast, we have Ross MacLean. He is one guy who's clearly been around the block a few times and a lot to say. So I'm not even going to preface this with what I loved about it because it was just great all the way around. And we definitely went a little bit longer than we should.
I mean, I have no idea how this guy's packed so much life experience into his life. Like, he's seen so much, done so much, has so many different amazing stories and just anecdotes. I learned a ton from this. Come for the Finland life experience, stay for the Cale Makar stories. Like, there's so much to love in this episode.
And I was amazed at how large of a resume he has and how much he's done. Again, working with Cale Makar, Dylan Holloway was in the first round this year. And then he put all that background in like 30 seconds. It was amazing.
Right. Yeah. One of the coolest episodes we've done. We barely scratched the surface. We'll have to have him back on because otherwise we could have gone for 3-4 hours. No sweat.
Super easy. So without further ado, let's get into the episode with Ross. Welcome to the podcast, Ross. Super excited to have you here. You're a well-traveled man.
I've gotten around, that's for sure.
Super excited to have you on. Well, I know you a little bit, obviously, and same with Dan, but maybe give the listeners a quick background on those who might not know your story and what you're up to now.
So, I mean, kind of in a nutshell, if you can really call it that, it's a big nutshell. But I grew up, originally born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, kind of grew up all over Eastern Canada, really kind of developed my love for hockey in London, Ontario. It's a hockey hotbed. A lot of people love hockey there. We ended up going back to Halifax, my family. So I graduated high school there, started university there, then decided to head over to Europe to continue my university, play a little bit, do some coaching, learn from some people there. One thing led to another. I got hooked up with the IIHF and some international federations, which got me involved in some international development projects, which got me involved in the scouting world, which brought me back to Canada. I scouted for a few years with the International Scouting Services, helped them develop their programs, including their coach and scout mentorship program, was head scout for them for a while. Then consulted for some teams, joined Hockey Canada, and now I'm doing my own thing. I've got my own company that's focused on minor hockey association development, and then I'm also working for the Calgary Hitmen at this point. So, long story short, that's been kind of the pathway that's sort of brought me to this point.
Before we dig into any of that, and I want to get through all of it, tell us the story, the origin story of probably the best elite prospects avatar I've ever seen. And it's also your Twitter bio of you in a Team Canada jersey and a cowboy hat.
Yes, it's a Corona sombrero, and that was from right after the gold medal game in the Pan American tournament, which was a IIHF event that I was fortunate enough to really fall into in during my time with Hockey Canada. The story there, and it's a great one, is that Hockey Canada had essentially promised the Mexican Ice Hockey Federation that they would send a team to represent Canada in this tournament designed to kind of promote hockey in South America. It basically got put on the back burner until the last minute, and then Bob Nicholson was in Sochi and called me and said, "Hey, we've got to send a team down here. I need you to do whatever you can. If you end up playing in it yourself, I'm fine with that." So we ended up getting a group of kind of guys that were just finishing playing kind of minor pro levels all together as a team from around Canada. We went down and we were Team Canada in Mexico City for this IIHF sanctioned event. So I was the captain of that team. It was a blast. We had some great players. We had to take it really seriously because it did factor into the rankings. And you're going to take a big hit if you lose a game to Brazil as Canada in the rankings. So we managed to get through the tournament. Mexico gave us a bit of a scare, but we ended up beating them in the final pretty convincingly. But it was a great tournament. They continue to have that tournament. Canada's not a part of it anymore, but that's where you see countries like Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, and then Mexico and some other countries that are starting to get involved. So it's a really important tournament for building hockey in South America, and it was an honor, a very lucky honor to actually be able to go down and participate in the first one. So
that's unbelievable. What a great story. Were people on any of those teams? Like, did they think that you guys were like NHL stars, like from Team Canada? You know what I mean?
Well, it was right after the Sochi Olympics, so
So the timing.
yeah. So we were in Mexico City, and
Yeah.
there was lineups of people to see us
It's
for
unreal.
the games, and everywhere we went, people were asking us for autographs, and and Mexico City is a massive city. We did one of the days off. A bunch of us went out to a little restaurant in the old town in Mexico City, and people were coming up to us and asking us for autographs there. So we were like pseudo celebrities for 10 days in Mexico City, and it was awesome. It was great to see people kind of latch onto it. But yeah, it was, people bringing me hats to sign after the games. I made sure I brought lots of little things I could give away, the Hockey Canada pins and so on. And, but yeah, every game, everyone was treating us like we were NHL superstars. So
You need to start a team down in Mexico City, first NHL team there.
There's a market, I'll tell you. I don't know if it'd be sellouts right away, but that's a growing sport down there, and the Mexican Ice Hockey Federation has done a really good job in trying to build the sport down there. You don't think that you don't think of Mexico when you think of hockey, but their national team, their first two lines especially, are quite good. There's guys that have had 4 or 5 year careers in major junior in Canada and NCAA players, and a couple guys that have gone over and played a few games in the KHL, things like that. So it's coming, and it's one of the great things to see when you go to places like that is how the game grows.
Excited though. I think that's amazing how it's growing beyond just the normal hockey borders, and I think you've had a front row seat to it, being through the eyes of Hockey Canada and even some time in Finland. If I remember correctly, you graduated from the Sport Institute of Finland, which is a pretty big honor. And what did you learn through your world travel so far, whether it be Mexico or Finland or
Well, I'll tell you, the decision to go to Finland and that Sport Institute was life-changing. I was really, again, fortunate to get on the radar as that program was beginning. So I ended up going over. I was the second or third Canadian to go. There was another Canadian in my group, and they were only taking about 14 people a year into that program at the time. And it was just ahead of its time. It's still ahead of its time. It's still going. And to go over at that point, I was still pretty young and immature at that time, and obviously the lure of possibly going over to play a little bit was there, but I ended up coaching a lot more than playing when I got there, and then doing a lot more stuff because it's the program in Virmäki, Finland. It's about 160 kilometers north of Helsinki in the middle of the Finnish forest, and it's just a sports paradise. And the Finns are highly advanced in terms of their grasp on athletic development and the physiological aspects of training athletes, not just hockey players, but hockey is the predominant sport there. So it gets most of the resources and most of the attention. You wonder why a nation of 4 million people is able to produce the quality of players that they have. It's because you go to a school and a 7-year-old kid can dictate back to you what long-term athletic development models look like. You come to Canada and the US and you talk about long-term athletic development models, you're lucky if people have even heard that acronym of LTAD before. So, Hockey Canada and USA Hockey have done a good job of trying to incorporate that into it. But over there, it's a way of life. Like, people buy into it. In North America, there's almost it's an interesting tool, but maybe we can skip this part. But it's all based on physiology, and you can't advance your physiology. You can't skip ahead in it. So the Finns get that. They buy into it. And to go over there and learn from them and to learn about those procedures was like being handed a golden goose. And really, there's not a day that goes by that I don't go back to something I learned in my 2.5, 3 years there in Finland, that they just absolutely pounded us with just this incredible knowledge that at the time, we had no idea what to do with. But now, 15 years later, I'm using it every single day. And I've been sending kids there, kids that want to get involved in coaching, kids that want to make a difference, want to have an impact on the game. I just turn them over to that program all the time. I got a bunch of them that are back here working for me. Guys have gone on to, become coaches in the KHL and major junior. And so, I've got this little army of followers now, of guys that have gone into this program that think the same way. And a lot of the stuff that we try to do, you can use these guys because they get it. They've been taught that way. So I ended up in Finland very much at the right time. And I really haven't looked back. Like I can't say enough. And whenever anybody asked me sort of what the tipping point for me was, it was that decision to go over to Finland to do that. And I was lucky, but I worked hard before that. I was coaching in Nova Scotia, and the provincial branch there had noticed that I was really into it as a young guy, and they wanted to push me forward. And that's what got me first aligned with Hockey Canada. And they were the ones that turned me on to this program. It was a really interesting story. It was my dad's 50th birthday party. And I got an email. It was my very first interaction ever with Paul Carson, who eventually became my boss and one of my major mentors. And at the same party, I'd read this email, and we had a whole bunch of people over for my dad's birthday. And one of my dad's really good friends came to me and said, "Hey, I was online and I saw this program and it made me think about you." And it was the exact same program. So I'd never heard about it before. And then in 2 days, or in one day, I hear about it twice. So right away, I sent back a message saying, "Yeah, I'm interested. Give me more details." I got connected with them, applied, got in, and then the rest is kind of history.
How old were you when you went?
I would have been 23 when that came around. So yeah, I was working as a bartender at a keg steakhouse, and so it was a bit of a change, and just coaching youth hockey.
Yeah.
So it was one of those crossroads moments. Like, do you really want to go down this path? And as much as I wanted to say, yeah, absolutely, it was a harder decision than I'll make it out to be. But there was a lot to weigh in doing it. But I have. The second that I landed in and took a deep breath of the Finnish air, which is probably the cleanest in the world, I had this overwhelming feeling that I was in the right spot, that I was going where I needed to go. And it still feels like a second home. I still am really close with a lot of people there, and I still take any opportunity I can to get back there. It was a magical place for me, and it's always going to have been the kind of sort of the birthplace of really my career.
That's amazing. What a great story. I'm speaking from USA Hockey, obviously. You from Canada Hockey, or Hockey Canada. I'm curious, I noticed last year when I went to I think it was level 4 coaching clinic, they were really hammering how Finland is ahead of the curve with this stuff. So it's definitely, become noticeable within, the top levels of USA Hockey that, like you said, 4 million people in Finland, they're obviously doing something right? So I'm curious, just as a blanket statement, where are we going? Where is Hockey Canada? Where is team or USA Hockey going to get to that level of commitment?
Well, I would say right now we're kind of treading in dangerous waters. We're seeing a lot more private entrepreneurship in the sport. We're seeing a lot more competition-based programming. We're seeing a lot more early specialization models where kids are hockey players. They're not doing other sports, and that's happening earlier and earlier. And that's actually dangerous with hockey. As much as I'm a huge supporter of kids playing hockey, I'm very much against hockey being the only sport kids play, especially pre-puberty. We want kids playing more sports. And what Finland is really doing better than everybody else is they're taking the competition-based models away, and they are making sure kids are athletes. They're focusing on making sure kids are well-rounded, that they have a really broad range of skills, and that's keeping them healthier. That's allowing them to adapt better through puberty, and then it's allowing them to have better adaptations after puberty in terms of training. So they're really setting them up for success. And in North America, we're still under that mindset for the most part that has always kind of helped us have success, in that we have the sheer numbers and we can kind of will ourselves to victories. Well, now you're coming up against a country that has that same mindset. They have the numbers of kids that are playing the sport, but they're actually setting them up to be significantly stronger and more adaptable, versatile human beings and athletes. So that's really kind of where the real shift is Finland gets that. Scoreboards don't light up in Finland for the most part until the kids are, 13, 14 years old. They're not seeing the score go up. So they're playing games, but they're not, serious competition. They're focused on skills. When you get over there, everybody's base skill set is significantly higher. I remember going over there and, being a decent level player. I remember going over there and stepping on the ice for just a shinny with some of my teachers from my program, and everybody was just unbelievably skilled. They could all do these things that, really only the elite players in Canada could do. And that's from that base. So they really do a bottom-up approach where it's let's focus on making sure all our kids are athletes. And then, we'll get them to specialize in hockey later. But most of their top players are multi-sport athletes well into their teens. Some of them still are by the time they get drafted in the NHL. And really the first time they decide to not be multi-sport athletes or to shift away from being multi-sport athletes is when they throw on an NHL jersey. So, that's a mindset that is really giving them an advantage. And it's a really hard sell here where we have so many people that have bought into the stigma that kids need to play more games. They need to have statistics. They need to be seen. They need to win. They need to know how to play the game when really what we're finding is that's not how it is at all. All the top players that I've been working with in Canada over the last 12 years are all kids that have understood this, Cale Makar, I had the great pleasure of coaching him when he was 13, 14 years old and up. And one of the first kids that I ever met that just got it. He knew that, hey, playing AAA as the worst defenseman might not be the best thing for me. Playing AA as the best defenseman, I'm going to get more reps. I'm going to get to play the game the way I want to play it. And that's how he handled things all the way up. And you look at where he is. And, Jake Sanderson kind of followed in his footsteps, gets drafted 5th overall this year, almost does the exact same thing that Cale did. So, there is a method to that madness. Everyone seems to think that it's all about a pathway, and you follow a pathway, and that's what's going to create what you need, your desired results. But that's not how it works. And you've got to pay attention to the physiology. You've got to pay attention, especially when they're pre-puberty, of setting them up for adaptation as opposed to trying to create adaptation early.
So how should we train or look at athletes pre-puberty? Is it just to keep them moving? Is there any kind of special things that you're trying to do with the athletes that you're currently training? How's that approach come from maybe Finland? And then how do you put your spin on it? Just in general, how do you think that should go?
So again, really what's happened here is Finland took the long-term athletic development model, which is not new, which has been around for a long, long time. They took that and they tweaked it to perfect it. They actually follow it. And the key there is that they felt like it was designed around the physiology of age groups for kids. Your 0 to 4 learning coordination skills and getting the basic movement patterns down, and then on and on and on and on and on. In North America, we've kind of moved away from that. So to really gain that advantage back, to try and realign things, like the roadmap exists already. It's there, and it's very, very good. Because that's exactly what Finland's using. And they're not just using it in hockey. I mean, you look at the NBA draft and they've had first-round draft picks in the NBA. They have high-level, elite-level soccer players playing in the top levels of the world. The amount of high-level athletes that they built that aren't just hockey players is incredible. And again, it's a nation of 4 million people. I'm in Alberta right now. We have almost the exact same demographics in comparison to Finland for everything. And if you put Alberta athletics, and Alberta's probably one of the most progressive provinces in Canada in terms of this. This is where Hockey Canada is headquartered. It still doesn't hold a candle to what Finland's doing. So, it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about actually following the plan that is really good, but nobody follows it. The problem right now is that everybody sees it. Oh yeah, that's a really good idea, but it's more than an idea. It really is a roadmap to success for young kids. And if we follow that a little bit closer, then that's what's going to create the advantage. So anything that I'm a part of, I kind of use that as my roadmap. That's okay, where are we? This is what we want to do. I get a lot of resistance from parents who think their kids are advanced in that. But the thing about long-term athletic development is it's based on the physiological development of kids in stages. And you can't cheat that. So moving from one zone to another zone, stage to another stage, doesn't make any sense. That's what holds kids back. That's what actually creates detriments to them being able to adapt to training further on. That's where we see kids with impingements, short hamstrings, chronic joint issues, and they haven't even hit puberty yet. Well, that doesn't go away because your body adapts, your central nervous systems adapt during puberty, and your body's in a state of recovery. So you're never going to be able to adapt from that. It's heartbreaking. When you see kids that can't do particular things after a certain age, well, it's not to say you can't do it, but it is closer to impossible than possible. So, we've got to pay more attention to what we're doing with young kids, making sure that they are more athletically inclined, more flexible, more adaptable, more versatile, that they work more muscle groups, they don't overuse things. But then the mental side of it too is that they, if you really love hockey, that's great. You don't like other sports and you only want to do hockey, that's fine. Apply hockey to other sports. Hockey is an invasion game where the goal is to get from one end of the ice to the other end, the one end of the playing surface to the other end of the playing surface to get points. Well, soccer's that, Basketball is that, lacrosse is that. There's all sorts of sports that you can apply hockey training to without actually being on the ice playing hockey. And you're working stabilizing muscle groups, which are going to help you avoid injury, help you resist injury, and help you overcome injury once you ultimately do get an injury. But that stabilizing muscle group aspect of it is extremely important as we come through puberty, because then your body's not in a state of recovery. Your body is primed and ready to actually really essentially adapt further afterwards. But if you go through that process of puberty and things change and your body's in recovery, well, there's no other window in your life where, you know, you go through something like that where you're going to be able to optimize your chances for adaptation later on. So it's a missed opportunity. And that's one of the key messages that everybody needs to kind of grasp right now.
I really like how you phrased something earlier. You said that, you know, the US and Canada have such big numbers that they kind of will their way towards success, just because of the, you know, the demographics that they have. I'm curious if you think that size is almost like a detriment in a sense, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a leading question, but like, I know that like in USA hockey, they've talked about kind of splitting up into different regions, right? So like you have the Mid-Atlantic region or whatever. Do you think that like compartmentalizing it makes it easier or harder? Because I get what you're saying and how, you know, it's like moving a cruise ship as opposed to like a, you know, whatever, a speedboat, because you've got to get so many people under this umbrella for there to be any sort of like impactful long-term change, right?
I mean, that all comes from leadership. And I'm not saying that there's been poor leadership, because there's been outstanding leadership in both countries for many, many years around it. But it's like, I love that analogy that it's like trying to move a cruise ship as opposed to, you know, maybe pushing a raft. And, you know, we'd like to think that we can hit the reset button and say, no, this is how you have to do things. But, you know, I learned this very quickly at Hockey Canada from Bob Nicholson and Scott Smith, that you can't do that. There is no reset button. You can't just say, no, we're going to do things this way. And I've seen it, you know, just when we tried to adjust the body checking ages in Canada, the resistance was unbelievable. When we tried to move the kids to cross ice hockey at the younger age groups, the resistance was huge. And, you know, that's also from some of the people that you would expect to be on your side, regardless of the decisions you make. So, you know, some of the provincial branch leadership fought that. And, you know, that's where you run into those problems about, you know, trying to move that mountain. So it happens in small things. I do like the idea of compartmentalizing. In Finland, how they do it, which works really well, is they have a position with each club that's called the head of coaching. And the head of coaching is a paid position, and it's a prestigious position. So the head of coaching for every club, and they're a club-based system as opposed to a minor hockey association-based system, which also has its pros and cons. But their role is they're ultimately tied to the federation. So the federation gives them particular things that they want to make sure that all the coaches in their clubs are getting. They then have the responsibility to select coaches that are in line with that, train those coaches on that, pass that information on. And so you get some real good continuity. And continuity is really the most important word here when it comes to developing minor hockey associations and creating structures for youth athletes. Is there has to be some element of consistency. There has to be some element of standards that are in place. And that's really a little bit easier to do when you start to break down the groups. When you look at Canada and the US and just the amount of kids that are playing hockey, and then the sheer geography of it all, you know, putting people in place in those areas that could ultimately lay that out would be the most beneficial situation that I've come across so far.
Backing up ever so slightly, maybe what are some of those pros and cons between it being club-based versus what we do here? And maybe it has something to do with how far we're spread out and how much territory you really need to cover. I mean, that's a lot of miles if you're covering all of Canada versus covering all of Finland. Is that something to do with it? Is it more of a cultural thing, or
It's
curious to see what the differences are and what the pros and cons are?
Yeah, it's probably more to do with a cultural thing. I mean, European club sports are bigger, and club sports usually go because you have a professional team that drives everything, and then everything floods down from there. So that tends to help. Now you're going to have bigger clubs, and again, I'll use Finland as an example. You have the Jokerit club, which is the Helsinki club, and they're huge. You know, they play in the KHL now. When I was there, they were still in the Finnish league. but they have youth teams. They have an under 20 team, an under 18 team, an under 16 team, and so on and so on and so on, all the way down to beginners. So kids come into those clubs. So when you have a head of coaching involved in that head of coaching is involved with the pro team all the way down. But you have sponsorships, you have a lot of revenues that are coming in from that program that can help a club like that. So what you see with Helsinki Jokerit is that they're able to recruit kids from other areas in the country that are high level players because they have the funds and the resources to offer them a little bit more. So kids can kind of travel. The borders are kind of open and they can go where it kind of fits best for them, especially when they get into those, really competitive years. The negative aspect of that is that if you're a kid in that area, that's kind of your option. And if you can't get involved with that option, then you're gonna have to go somewhere else for another. So there's lots of smaller clubs in the area. And in terms of North America, it's all about recruitment and retention. And we have varying degrees of social class and economy right now. And with a sport like hockey that's expensive to play, there's a lot of barriers to entry. And we need to remove some of those things. So that's where a volunteer-based minor hockey structure fits a little bit better. The cost is reduced a little bit, but you're also sacrificing a little bit in terms of maybe the organizational resources. So that's where, Hockey Canada and USA Hockey have tried to invest some resources, try and make sure that there's some people in those places that can help with that. But it's just it's so big that it's hard to manage. So, I mean, the club-based structure works really, really well when you're in the club, but getting into the club can be difficult sometimes. Whereas a minor hockey structure, volunteer-based, there's lots of opportunity for everybody. Try to reduce the costs as much as possible. Try to create programs that are involved in getting kids into the game. But you lose out a little bit in terms of that idea of having, real professional coaches. There's not a lot of high-level coaches that just randomly volunteer their time to come work with teams, 5 nights of the week. It doesn't happen. It's unfortunate, but when you specialize in it, and I'm certainly guilty of this, when you specialize in it, it becomes all your time. You have to make a living at some point. So, you got to create some sort of cost structure there that fits for minor hockey associations, that's not going to exploit the kids for profit, and allows you to really give the resources and information and be a building block as opposed to something that's in the way. So those are kind of the main two. There's lots of others, but really the main two drivers between club and a minor hockey volunteer-based structure are kind of that aspect, really the barriers to entry, and then trying to keep the cost of the sport affordable and accessible to as many people as possible.
It seems like a lot of thoughtful people in the sport have come to this conclusion. I happen to agree that we play too many games, that like competition at a young age is prioritized over skills, like you were saying in Finland. And I'm wondering if the cat is out of the bag and if there's any way, we can like kind of bring it back to a more reasonable number. Because I think back to like when I was a kid, 20 years ago, whatever, like we didn't play that many games, and the number that we played then is like the norm, like at a very young age in America now. So I'm speaking for, I'm in Columbus, Ohio, but I'm curious what you think about, just like the sheer number of games and the importance that, culturally we place on games, and maybe where that's going.
Well, it's really interesting. And, the real way to change that, like the reset button with that one does happen every year because new kids come into the sport every year. And when you introduce them to one thing, that's all they ever know. So they don't know this other aspect. So, if we really want to make a change, it happens basically, with the U7 categories. Like, hey, let's institute something with them, and then let's continue it on as they proceed. You can try it with other groups. You're going to get resistance, but most people are just going to adapt. That's what happens. That's what happened with body checking. It took a year. Everyone adapted. You never hear anybody talking about it now. It took about a year and a half for the cross ice hockey in Canada to adapt at the younger age groups. And now very rarely do you hear people complain about it. Everyone kind of says, oh yeah, this is better. So there's always that resistance to change. So, it basically just, you got to realize and plan strategically when the best time to institute those changes are, as opposed to seasonal structure. Again, that goes back to consistency. Our seasonal structures in North America are all over the map. Hockey's become a 12-month sport. You've got your regular winter seasons now. Then you've got spring hockey, you've got all these summer tournaments and all these things that happen. And those are really the big problems right now, is that the whole season is a competitive game structure. And then you have people that brand that as development, which it is the polar opposite of development. So, really, yeah, we should be taking stock of the fact that it is a cultural thing. I mean, the kids love the games, obviously. They don't necessarily love the competition. And there's ways to have the games where we're still doing skill. And that's what Finland's really kind of done with their young ages really, really well to get kids interested in the sport, is they do skills. But every skill session that you do has some element towards the end of small area games and actually playing, having fun. And that's what the kids remember. They remember the last drill of practice. So you could do boring, tedious skill development, but again, guys are getting really good at hiding that stuff now in terms of making drills more fun. And it's not just standing in place and, hopping over a stick all the time. There's a lot of shooting, a lot of passing, a lot of element to it. But, that's the key, is making sure that the kids fall in love with actually being on the ice, coming to the rink. And it's really the parents that miss the competition. The kids don't really care about the competition. Competition to kids is stressful. And it's great when they succeed. They have a lot of fun. They love posing with trophies and things like that. But the risk of doing that is, you have an 8-team tournament. One team's going to get to do that. The other 7 teams aren't. And that's not a good enough ratio for, trying to teach kids to love the sport. So we're really not utilizing our resources or looking at our outcomes in a positive way.
So is there a way to almost take score of the skills being utilized rather than goals being scored? Or is there ways of using that as a youth organization, especially if you've got like House League, where you totally can control the factors that are going into that? Or is that something that Hockey Canada is thinking of? Because I know it's something that I've done personally.
We do that too.
With a lot of my practices is who cares about goals and assists? How many times are you making cross ice passes over the Royal Road before you shoot, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are ways, the quantifiable measures and keeping score of things are all ways to definitely, help kids take stock of their own performance. But really at the younger ages, it should be, just teaching them to identify what's a positive play and what's not a positive play. So, I like things, like you're talking about, completed passes. I like things like loose puck races, stuff like that. All those kinds of things are really good for kids because, that's in the games they play themselves. A lot of that stuff is in there. They play games where they have to keep a ball up in the air as many times as they can with each other. They play, they do tons of races. They love racing for things. So, when we're talking about kids, yeah, that kind of stuff, again, you quantify it. But if you make it too competitive, again, it becomes stressful. And that's not what we want sport to be. If you want kids to be elite, they need to love the game. They need to have an intrinsic motivation to come to the rink all the time. And, it needs to be their happy place. And that happens through, again, just really good, positive personal interactions, making them confident with their skills, and then letting them go and try and be creative. And that's the type of stuff that, we should be teaching and putting more emphasis on with youth hockey. And then as those kids get into competition-based streams, and again, all this is in long-term athletic development plan. Like, it's all there. It's, hey, we want to make sure that these kids are able to do this and that this is why. So, people really need to take a deep dive into those documents: long-term athletic development, long-term player development. You hear LTPD model all the time. USA Hockey talks about it all the time. Hockey Canada talks about it all the time. But the fact of the matter is that most people just glance over it. They don't take the deep dive into it to really figure out what it is, what it means, and how it actually helps kids. Because it's a fantastic roadmap to what is physiologically and mentally the most important things for kids at the particular age group and stage of development that they're in.
Wonderful. I like that a lot. I think Sweden, they even dropped it even further down. I think they're only doing fourth ice in the offensive zone. So instead of cross ice, they've been cutting that in half for the youngest ages and making it even smaller. So there's so many puck touches. You might know more than I am on that one, but I guess I'm kind of curious more about your coordinator role with Hockey Canada. It's obviously a lot of stuff we've already talked about. Maybe something you can add there of what you took away and how that's led into your role currently, helping the Calgary Hitman and the guys that you're working with, what kind of ways you go around improving their skills.
So, I 100% relished my time with Hockey Canada. It was fantastic, and mostly because of the people that I got to work with and learn from while I was there. My role was a coordinator of development programs there, and it was to design programs for kids that we could, pass on to minor hockey associations, that we could show different models of things, like one of my biggest tasks was combating spring hockey competition based models, which is obviously something I'm very passionate about. I had learned a lot about in Finland, so it just fit really well. So I tried to create more kind of hybrid training models that were based around multi-sport and less about games and tournaments and competitions. It was, hey, for every hour you're going to be on the ice, we're going to do an hour or two of off ice. And that hour or two of off ice could have been things like, we're going to do soccer skills and learn how to apply it to hockey. We're going to do badminton and learn why it's such a beneficial sport for goaltenders to play, things like that, teaching the different movement patterns. And then we do a lot of physical literacy, functional movements, and neuromuscular stuff as well, which is always just great to do with kids at different levels. And they have fun with it, and there are ways to kind of hide it to make it an enjoyable experience. So those were a couple of things that I got involved with at Hockey Canada that were great. But a lot of the language that I speak was really just reinforced there from learning, getting that kind of seed planted in Finland, getting a great look at some of these things. But Paul Carson and Corey McNabb with Hockey Canada. Corey McNabb, I always call him the guru, and he's the director of player and coach development for Hockey Canada, and he may be the game's best kept secret. The guy's a genius. The guy just absorbs everything. Most high level NHL players know him because you get to lockouts or situations like we're in now. If they were able to travel, he's the guy they call. He's one of those guys, I think, if you ever just like stepped out of the office in Hockey Canada and whispered that he was even slightly unhappy, there's 31 NHL teams calling him, maybe even 32 now, calling him to try and obtain his services. He's that good, and he gets it, and he looks at what these other countries are doing, and he pays attention to it, and he's highly involved in international development, trying to pass that message on. So I give Paul Carson, who recently retired, and Corey McNabb just most of the credit in terms of the real success Hockey Canada's had, and they've done it often handcuffed. People think in Canada you get this carte blanche to do what you want with hockey development, but it's extremely restrictive and political when you get to that level. And those are two guys that just navigated those relationships phenomenally well, hired some really great people in that development department, threw in a bad apple with me, and still were able to kind of get some really good programming and concepts going. So that's fundamentally what's kind of the most important aspect is having that leadership that gets that and is trying, regardless of the roadblocks and U-turns that happen, of making sure that these types of thoughts get planted in people like my bad apple mind. And then, I get to go be a mad scientist with it now at times and come up with things and figure out things that work out with kids. So, that time with Hockey Canada was amazing just for that. Again, I could rhyme off a whole bunch of people's names here: Kevin Figsby, Greg Robertson, Mike Bear. There's just some unbelievable people there that you get different personalities, different views of the game, different backgrounds. So that breadth really, really helps someone like me gain confidence and different viewpoints of things to solve problems. And that's how I like to see myself, as a problem solver, and always trying to learn to figure out better ways to deal with problems. So that's really kind of what I took from my experience with Hockey Canada. And then moving on into my own private enterprise of becoming what I hate, I've tried to apply those things. Hockey Canada wanted to move away from the development programs. I wanted to keep it going because I thought we're onto something. And so I've kept that going. I've aligned myself with minor hockey associations. I don't work with other private companies that run, super leagues and spring teams and so on. I just, that's not something I believe in. So I try to have an alternative model. I try to be very inclusive in it and very flexible with it. So it's very much a differentiation strategy, but it's also something that works for particular people. And when they grab onto it and they're able to utilize the benefit of it, they can kind of punch their own tickets. And that's really kind of what I want people to have control of their own development, which I think a lot of people, especially in Canada, sometimes feel like in a minor hockey structure, they don't. You end up on a team with a coach that, you don't think is very good or can't help you, or, I wanted to, again, be someone that could fix those problems. So I aligned myself with minor hockey. I said, hey, if you're finding yourself, your coaches need training, bring us in. We'll help you out. We'll make it cost effective for your association. We'll keep it within your budget, and we'll provide as much value as possible. And then through that, I've been able to recruit really high level people that have gone over and done the same program I did, that have been, coaching for years, that have been involved with national federations or provincial branches. And then they're just passing on that same message, the same stuff that we've been working for so long to try and do. So it's happening at a smaller bit, but I'm starting to see what I saw with the competition-based models happen now with development-based models, and especially with the pandemic. And it became a huge opportunity because no one was allowed to play games. The people that usually didn't do development stuff because they couldn't play games started doing development stuff, and most of them absolutely loved it. And it's not just with me, it's with other people that run development programs. All these kids that were never exposed to that were all of a sudden now doing that and saying, whoa, this is great. And then the parents are realizing, oh, maybe it is my fault that the kids that we're only playing games. Maybe that is only for me and it's not for them. Maybe I was wrong about that. So, there's been some benefit there. And then, punching all that together with my role with the Hitmen, as I do a lot of scouting work there, trying to identify prospects, helping out with the draft, keeping tabs on our players and offering up player development tips for our coaching staff and dealing with the management. So, the reason I took that job was I was actually in the mix for a couple of other CHL GM positions. And I got to the point where I got so far within one interview process that I realized, oh no, I might get this. And I'm someone who likes to know everything about what I do. I want to have an impact right away. I don't want to fly by the seat of my pants. So I have a really good relationship with our coach with Calgary, Steve Hamilton, who's just an unbelievably unheralded coach. And he got me hooked up with the front office for the Hitmen, talking with them. And then I realized right away that, hey, here's, again, like Hockey Canada, here's some guys that could really teach me something. So Mike Moore, Jeff Chenouth, and Dallas Thompson with the Calgary Hitmen they've been making my wishes come true. They've been the careful what you wish for type stuff, because they've just loaded me up with teaching me what it's all about, how to do it. I mean, Jeff Chenouth is the GM. The trophy that when you win the championship in the Western Hockey League is named after his dad. The guy's been a GM in the league for over 20 years. There are few people that are better to learn from, and not just in terms of the hockey side of the game, in terms of the networking and dealing with people. This guy is unbelievable. So, and he's where he wants to be. He doesn't really have any ambitions of going to the NHL. I'm not sure if he did, he'd be there. His brother's coaching in Carolina as one of the assistant coaches in Carolina. And again, just my interactions and watching him present stuff and talking with him, like, it's a family that kind of understands things and gets it. And there's a different way, and they make it about people. So, for someone like me who's been very, very technical and trying to learn all these things, to have these guys that are teaching me about how it's more about people now, and to get that experience, again, has been invaluable to me. Like, I can't say enough about it. Again, it's, it hasn't been the most lucrative decision, but that's not why I did it. I did it because I wanted experience. I wanted to learn from people. And I got way more than I ever could ask for in just a year and a half, in aligning myself with those guys. So, that type of stuff is really important. I've made a lot of sacrifices along the way to get involved in situations where I know I'm going to get really good experience, because, the short-term element of gaining monetary benefit from things, sure, that feels great. Yeah, you could maybe drive a better car or eat out a few more times. But, ultimately, when you want to progress in the sport, it's those little elements that eventually pile up on your resume that somebody looks at down the line, and that's what makes you more valuable in a position. And I've been very ambitious, but I've been very cautious in terms of the steps that I take, because every position that I get to, I want to have an impact. I don't want to be just a guy. And that comes from always being open to learn, and the willingness to make some sacrifices. I wouldn't be able to do this without my parents, who have been able to support me when I make ridiculous sacrificial decisions, like deciding I'm going to go to school in Finland on a bartender from Halifax's salary. Although I got to say, if there's a place to be a bartender, it's Halifax, Nova Scotia. That's a drinking culture.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. But that's really kind of the timeline of all that, and the pathway, and my mindset on it all, and how it's been so beneficial, how I've been able to make a career out of this.
I want to touch one last moment on your scouting background, what you're looking for, and even now, what are you looking for in youth players, and making that projectable to the level that you're trying to get them to or beyond that?
Well, the real adaptation in my scouting mentality over the years has been when I first started scouting, you're always, you're just looking for the best players. Who's the best player out there? Who's that? What I learned after a few years is that, the best player at a level doesn't carry over from one level to the next level to the next level. And, again, I was lucky when I started that I was in Finland and learning about physiology and learning about, human performance and adaptation. And so being able to apply some of that, in my third, fourth, fifth years of scouting really changed how I saw who the best prospects were. Beyond that, as I started to get involved with skill coaching and, started learning from Corey McNabb about that stuff, all of a sudden I saw it in a totally different light, where scouting now to me is about finding good players with weaknesses that I know I can fix, or that I know somebody in the organization that we're drafting to can work with. That's where you're going to find the value. So, finding the best players is easy. They stand out. They always have the puck. They're always doing something. They make things happen. But it's finding, in terms of potential, it's finding the players that actually aren't able to do some things where most people write them off for not being able to do it, and realizing, oh, that's fixable. When this player is at this level already, and when we teach them how to do this, all of a sudden they're going to be twice the player. I always tell the story of when the Calgary Hitmen drafted Sam Bennett, everyone made a huge deal because the combine he couldn't do a pull-up. Well, what's going to happen when you teach this kid to do a pull-up?
I always felt like that was the weirdest logic. Exactly.
So, the scouting to me has really become about finding the weaknesses and the things in players that you can dig deeper into and figure out how to fix. And that's what potential is. That's where you find, that's where Cale Makar's rise was so huge. Because, when he was coming up at in the U15 age groups, he was probably fourth on the depth chart in his age group in terms of defensemen. So think about that. Here's the Rookie of the Year, Calder Trophy winner. Most of the NHL guys that I work with and know talk about him as being in the top 5 most elite defensemen already at 21 years old. And he was the fourth on the depth chart as he was, U15. When he got to U16, he was, probably he moved up a notch or two and was second or third. And then when he gets to U18, plays a year there again, he's kind of, behind some older players. But then when he starts to play in junior A, then that's where he starts to take off, and he starts to, become this, what we're used to. And, a lot of that came from, I have not, I maybe only worked with one other kid that I would put into the same tier of work ethic and focus as Cale Makar. Like, that was a kid that, you blew the whistle and he's still trying to sneak in one more rep on a drill every single time. First kid on the ice, last kid off, that type of thing. The other guy.
So who's your new guy? Who's the other one?
Category, 15th overall this year to Edmonton, Dylan Holloway. Same association, same mindset. Holloway actually probably has a little bit more intensity to him than Cale does, but same focus, same drive. And, when people were asking me about gems sort of in this draft, I kept Holloway is just one of those guys that, he doesn't necessarily always blow you away with skill. It's there and it's high end, but, compared to, Lafreniere and guys like that, he might not be in the same category, but he wills things to happen. His desire is generational. And, that's, again, another aspect that when you're a skills coach and you get to work with guys, you start to see that type of stuff. So to me, wearing both hats has been really beneficial. And you ask, if you're going to ask me what my advice to anybody who wanted to get involved in scouting is get involved in coaching, learn how to teach skills, and get into the rinks and watch kids start to find the kids that fit with those drills that you're learning how to teach and what your strengths are as a coach. And that's going to be your value. And that's the type of value that, we've seen a lot of ex-players be the ones that get the scouting roles. Well, they're at a disadvantage, I think, when things shift into people that are actually learning about physiology and skill development and athletic development, and then going and watching players, compared to somebody who, I played the game, so I can come and I can watch somebody who also plays the game. To me, the best is somebody who's able to put all of those things, check all of those boxes. That's where you're going to find that scouting is not just about showing up and watching the rinks and saying who the best players are anymore. When hopefully when I become a GM in a league, that's kind of what I'm going to be looking for in a scouting staff, is guys that are able to do more than one thing. There's got to be some range there. There's got to be an element that, yeah, okay, you can identify talent, but can you also identify value? And with your background experience, how do you actually pull that out?
Within that, I'm curious, what are some of those fixable things you're talking about? What are things that you feel are easily fixable, or maybe some things that are a little tougher to do and maybe you don't want to really take on?
I mean, the easiest ones to fix are always going to be technical skills, because they're all mechanical and they're all, it's technique. Some techniques harder to teach than others, but most technical skills you're going to be able to look at and say, okay, we make a tweak here, we make a tweak there, we change where your weight distribution is. Some element of that is always going to help. You do end up with some physiological deficiencies, which again aren't impossible, but are significantly closer to impossible than possible to fix. And that's, where you end up with kids. And I see this a lot of times. It's heartbreaking. I remember doing some of the testing work with Hockey Canada with the national teams, and you would have these highly touted, unbelievable hockey players show up, and they would do the athletic testing and they couldn't run in a straight line. They couldn't throw a ball. And, their bodies are adapted. Like, they've gone through puberty. That these are fundamental changes that have happened in their body. And, after a couple of years, you start to realize what happens to these guys. And they get one bad injury and they're done. They're not able to adapt at the same capabilities as the other players who have, developed a little bit better. And so they get left behind. So it's heartbreaking in a sense to, be able to identify some of that stuff. But that's the stuff that, you need to start identifying in young kids. Like, oh, this kid needs some work in terms of their flexibility, in terms of their range and motion, their functional movements. And that's where, it's really important to do. So as you get older and you start to watch some of these kids, if I'm scouting for the NHL draft, that's some of the stuff that you look for. You look for, those real physiological impediments. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of kids that have specialized early and have really ruined their bodies. And so, a lot of NHL teams are doing that through the questions. They ask, hey, what other sports did you play as a kid? That's becoming a real serious question that teams are putting a lot of stock into. That, you hear about a kid that's played a whole bunch of different sports. Okay, odds are that even before I test this kid, when I test him, I know probably what I'm going to find out here is that this is a kid that's adaptable and is going to get a lot better. Whereas a kid that's, I didn't really play any other sports, again, odds are, it's not the case every time, but odds are that this kid is likely going to have some serious problems adapting to things. And again, I don't want to say that's always the case, because there are some people that manage to overcome that, but that's more the exception than the rule. So, that element of things, when you can get a better knowledge base on that, I think we're really moving into a structure, especially at the professional level, where the teams that are going to be really, really good at scouting in the next little while are going to be teams that have staffs that are aware of physiological constraints and ways to deal with the physiological issues that young athletes are going to have, be it from early specialization or, even kids that are developing properly, how to get the most out of them physiologically. So, strength and conditioning coaches are more important now than they've ever been, especially really good ones that understand, that functional movement aspect of it. I'll shout out Chris Osmond with Philadelphia Flyers. I think he's one of the guys that taught me the most about it. So, he worked for me for a couple of years when I was with Hockey Canada, snatched up by the Flyers real quick, and, great hire for them, especially with a young core. There's a guy that's going to develop, high level athletes. So, the full spectrum of teams now in terms of scouting and what you need to incorporate in it. It's not just about finding the best players on the ice anymore. You got to find, really physiologically either gifted or, kids that have a base that you can adapt. So those are the real kind of fundamental issues that are coming up. So it's becoming more and more complicated. It's requiring more and more expertise. And I think that's a really good thing as opposed to a negative thing.
That's incredible.
Cale Makar, I want to know, what was his issue back in the day? Why was he so far down, and what did he fix? Real quick here. We don't have that much time left.
Cale was, he was a little bit more of a late bloomer in terms of how he grew. We did a ton of work on his hips as a kid. We were always doing stuff with getting his hips open to the play. He's one of the first kids I remember actually doing a lot of hip mobility stuff. Now I do it all the time. So, if memory serves me correctly, it was that. And he was very, very offensive minded. He always wanted to jump up in the rush. I remember having a conversation with him where I was like, dude, we need to make you a forward. So I always tell this in coaches conferences, hey, you're getting taught by the guy that almost ruined Cale Makar.
I don't know if that would have ruined him, but I know what you mean.
But that was kind of the thing with him, was he was really offensive, and it wasn't necessarily risky, but didn't necessarily have the skills to execute all the time. But he worked at that, and then it just hit, and off he went. Like, that kid deserves so much credit, just how hard he worked and how much focus he has. He is just an unbelievable human being.
Wonderful stuff. Well, this has been an excellent episode. There's no way we can't have you back on in the future. We feel like we barely scratched the surface. Dan can definitely back that one up.
Seriously, we didn't even get to Bosnia.
I can do a whole episode on Bosnia.
But at the end of every episode, we'd love to leave the floor open. 2 minutes, anything you want to talk to. Might give you only a minute since he took so long and gave us such great answers. But floor is yours for a minute. Give us a book recommendation as well. We got a lot of readers out there.
I'm going to reiterate everything that I said in this interview. Dig deep into long-term athletic development model, long-term player development model. You want to learn about the sport, you want to learn about making kids better, those are the roadmaps. Great book that aligns with that is Range by Daniel Epstein.
I just read that. Unreal book.
Phenomenal book, but it gets across that concept of being well-rounded, that concept of using other things to gain strength in what you specialize in. So, the whole premise of that book is about how breadth is more important than specialization. And he's a phenomenal researcher, a great writer. He's one of those guys that if you interact with him on Twitter, he almost always interacts back. And The Sports Gene by him, his first book, again, another phenomenal book in terms of want to start getting a base idea of the physiology of things. And the premise of that one is how it's kind of hardware versus software. And this whole idea that, some kids are born with talent and other kids earn it. His 2 books, I would recommend to anybody, but Range has probably been my favorite book that I read in the past 2-3 years, just because of that whole concept and what I preach. And I've lived it. I've experienced that in terms of trying to build, a well-rounded skill set as opposed to just specializing in one thing. And I think that's the way the world's going. I definitely think that's the way the sports world's going. So 100%, that's the one that I would say read right now.
Couldn't agree more. And where can people find you? Tell them about your website.
So I have a website. It's just www.mcleanhockey.com, MACLEAN, hockey.com. I have 2 Twitter handles. It's Ross MacLean 77 is my personal one, and then McLean_hockey or McLean Hockey on Instagram. I post a lot of videos of drills, some presentations that we do on helping minor hockey associations and culture. So follow along. I'm always happy to interact with people and answer questions on those platforms as well.
Wonderful. Well, again, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time, and we'll have to have you back.
I would love to come back. This has been great. These are great questions.
Thanks, Ross. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for tuning into the Hockey IQ podcast. We are Hockey's Arsenal. Greg Revac and Dan Dukart. Together, we've come together to create a platform and a community to expand on hockey intelligence, hockey IQ, whatever you want to call it. We're very passionate about seeing this game played smarter and better and continue to develop itself to the next level and staying on the cutting edge of things. So you can find us at Hockey's Arsenal on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We're also at hockeysarsenal.com. From there, you can find some resources and some options to work with us. We're excited to continue this. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, follow, and share. You can also join up for our newsletter as well, where we're going to tackle anything Hockey IQ related. So we're excited to have everyone here and continue to build.